What's up, everybody? Hope you're ready for a marathon because we've got a lot to get through today as Sean P. Diddy Combs has been indicted. It's something we knew was coming. We just didn't know when. But today we've got the indictment, which we're going to read through in its entirety together. Some gory details we're going to get to. But that's not all. There was also a press conference by the U.S. attorney who is in charge with prosecuting P. Diddy now. But even after that, we have the detention letter. Why the U.S. Attorney's Office thinks P. Diddy should be detained, waiting trial, not out on his own. And they give lots of reasons for that. And just recently, I haven't even read this document yet, the response from the defense and what they think the bond should be, why they think Diddy should be let out waiting for trial, all that and more. And of course, I'm bringing my dad on. It's a federal case. We're going to talk federal prosecutions and criminal defense here. Perfect guest for that. So hit the like button for that. Make sure you guys are all subscribed to our page because this won't be the last video we do on this P. Diddy case, but it will be one of the longer ones. So get ready, settle in, and let's get to it. All right. So to start out, Dad, welcome in. We are going to do the indictment here, starting with count one. This is in the District of Court, Southern District of New York. I think somebody sent me, they have like a 98% conviction rate or success rate. No surprise there. Most federal offices do.
That's standard across the country. And just to start off, one of the biggies here is this is an indictment in New York. This could have been anywhere in the country. It could have been Miami.
Miami, LA, New York, I think were the big three that it was.
Right.
Could have been any of those three.
And everybody needs to know what happened here. They had a meeting at the Department of Justice, I'm sure, to decide which district was going to indict this. And they've decided on New York, which is obviously a highly qualified district to prosecute sex crimes and sex trafficking. They have a lot of experience at it.
Ozzy starts saying more like R. Kelly or YSL. No, this is like Epstein. Okay. If you want to say it's like Epstein, I don't really know who it's like. I just think that when we hear RICO and we hear racketeering, back in the day, it used to mean one thing, but today it really seems to mean anything they want to catch something they think is a big criminal organization with all these different things, to put in all these different facts, to really build and make them look like a horrible person. So the jury just starts feeling like I'm going to convict them, whether or not it fits into this crime. That feels more like R. Kelly than YSL. I think they're trying to do similar things with YSL, but the sexual deviance and the music and things that are, one man sitting at the top of the pyramid feels more like R. Kelly than YSL and Young Thug. But I also put those two in the title because R. Kelly was federal, Young Thug is state, and you saw how differently that went. And guess what? This is federal. So again, another reason I think it's going to feel more like the R. Kelly case than it does the YSL case. But let's read the indictment here. Count one, racketeering conspiracy. For decades, Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. P. Diddy, Diddy, PD, and Love, the defendant, abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influences of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other things, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The defendant operated his business headquarters in various times in Manhattan, Los Angeles, and under a variety of United States-based corporate entities, including Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global. Collectively, now they're going to call them Combs Businesses. Corporate entities in the Combs business included, among other things, record labels, recording studio, apparel line, alcoholic spirit businesses, I think Ciroc, marketing agencies, and television network and media company. He is often and commonly known as the media mogul, entertainment mogul, rap mogul, R&B mogul. Like he is the top dog, one of the richest, most successful in this industry. So it's wild to see these kinds of names thrown around like Bad Boy Records and Ciroc and things like that. At all times relevant to this indictment, the defendant engaged in a persistent and pervasive pattern of abuse towards women and other individuals. This abuse was at times verbal, emotional, physical, sexual. And as a pattern of the abuse, Combs manipulated women to participate in highly orchestrated performances of sexual activity with male commercial sex workers. At times, Combs and others, acting at his discretion, made arrangements for women and commercial sex workers to fly to Combs' location. He ensured participation from the women by, among other things, obtaining and distributing narcotics to them, controlling their careers, leveraging his financial support, or threatening to cut off the same, and using intimidation and violence. Anytime you want to jump in, just let me know. I'm just reading, so I can't really see. Physical abuse by Combs. The defendant was recurrent and widely known on numerous occasions from at least in or about 2009, continuing for years. Combs assaulted women by, among other things, striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects at, and kicking them. One thing that's interesting as we listen to all this, we know there's a bunch of civil plaintiffs. We know there's been a bunch of settlements. A lot of those settlement agreements, releases, NDAs can be completely bypassed in a federal investigation. They can still testify. They can still be called to trial for the most part. And we know there are videos with people like Cassie and some of the higher profile victims in this case, where there's hotel videos of him physically abusing her, which is going to add credibility to anything else she testifies to, which we've read some of her complaints and civil allegations. They seem very similar to a lot of the allegations in this complaint. And I think that there are a lot more victims than just Cassie.
Well, there's at least 4 separate civil suits and even some more than that dealing with this kind of activity. And, one of the big things is, why didn't he stop? All this stuff is coming out, and he never stopped, and he never gave it a second thought, and he settled these cases. Cassie's case in particular, he would deny it in one breath, and then he'd settle it in the next breath.
And not just settle it, but then he would apologize for certain things. And
after the video came out.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. He denied it. Video came out. He settled the civil lawsuit, and then he made a kind of an apology video. And again, he's innocent until proven guilty in the criminal realm. The prosecution still has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. But there's also a lot of things in this case that are objective or even admitted to by Puff Daddy, by P. Diddy, whatever we're going to call him, the defendant in this case. Now, I don't think settling a civil lawsuit automatically makes you guilty, but the timeline of it and when the videos come out, that's going to be evidence the U.S. Attorney's Office can use.
Right.
Let's see. Attacking. Okay. These assaults were at times witnessed by others, including one instance at a Los Angeles hotel in or about March of 2016, which was captured on video and later publicly reported, where Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a woman as she was attempting to leave. I believe that's Cassie.
That's Cassie.
When a member of the hotel security staff intervened, Combs attempted to bribe the staff member to ensure silence. Combs's violence was also not limited to these women. It extended to his employees, witnesses, to his abuse, and others. The defendant used the Combs business, including certain employees, to carry out, facilitate, and cover up his abuse and commercial sex. Those employees, including security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and high-ranking supervisors and other close associates, acted as Combs's intermediaries, and their conduct was facilitated and assisted by Combs' control of the Combs business. The Combs enterprise, and it's important for them to do this. Why don't you real quick, just because we haven't talked about it yet on the video, explain what RICO is, how it can pertain to something like this, and why they have to explain the actual enterprise, and why we explain how all this works into the enterprise and for the benefit of the enterprise.
Well, you've got to be a little historical. RICO was written for organized crime. It was written for the John Gottis and the Colombo families because they were so isolated, because they were an individual at top that controlled everything, that getting to them was almost impossible because they didn't actually commit a lot of the crimes that were occurred, but they just gave the authority or the go-ahead. So it was designed for that kind of a group. So it was designed in such a way so you could establish an enterprise first. So the enterprise in this case is going to be, they call it Combs, but it is all going to be all of his enterprises, all of his corporations, all of his businesses. So that, they say, is an enterprise. And that's why they talk about the Combs enterprise here, because that's necessary for a RICO. Organized crime cases, the enterprise was the organized crime family, the Colombo family. In this case, we have the Combs family. So they're adopting RICO now to other types of cases where they can establish that there was an organization that operated as a criminal enterprise, and that's the Combs. So we start with the enterprise. You want me to do it step by step, or you want to go through the enterprise first?
I don't know what you mean. Do it. Yeah, explain the full RICO, and then we'll
Okay.
read through why they explain enterprise, then the predicate acts, where the crimes actually are, how they occurred. So give the setup, and then we'll read specifically so people can analyze and connect the facts of this case to what RICO actually is, what it's trying to stop, why it exists.
All right. So you've got the enterprise, in this case, Combs. And then you have to have two predicate acts, which means two crimes that were committed pursuant to the organization or the enterprise. And in this case, they're talking about sex trafficking, obstruction of justice, all sorts of other crimes that occurred pursuant to the enterprise. And the enterprise was directed by Mr. Combs. And so he is the central figure. There are various kinds of enterprises, but in this case, it's a head person who his leadership trickles down to the other people, and he organizes and orders them to commit crimes. So they commit two predicate acts pursuant to the enterprise, and then they have racketeering. In this case, they also talk about a conspiracy, and a conspiracy means an agreement to commit racketeering. So technically, they don't even have to commit a crime, but just agree to commit a crime pursuant to an enterprise and do some substantial step toward the commission of that crime, and that becomes a conspiracy. In this case, they've got a racketeering conspiracy, and we'll see later on where they talk about the groups of people, how they get together, and how they agree to commit crimes.
Right. And they talk about here right off in the beginning that members and associates of the Combs Enterprise engage in all of the crimes mentioned above. Combs Enterprise, including its leadership, members, associates, as defined by Title 18 USC Section 1961, Paragraph 4. That is a group of individuals associated, in fact, although not a legal entity. The Combs Enterprise consisted of Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy, P.D. Love, the defendant, entities within the Combs business, including but not limited to Bad Boys Entertainment, Combs Enterprise, Combs Global, individuals employed by and associates of the Combs business, and others known and unknown, which leaves it open for more people potentially. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the press conference, because some of the reporters actually asked the U.S. attorney about, will anybody else be indicted? Will there be more charges coming for Diddy? And we'll hold off on answering that question until we get to the press conference. Combs Enterprise constituted an ongoing organization whose members functioned as a continuing unit for a common purpose of achieving the objectives of the Combs Enterprise. The Combs Enterprise was engaged in, and its activities affected interstate and foreign commerce. The Combs Enterprise operated in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere. At all times relevant here too, the defendant was the leader of the Combs Enterprise. The defendant and others known and unknown participated in unlawful and other activities related to the conduct of the Combs Enterprise's affairs. These individuals included certain...
Stop for a second.
Okay.
People might want to know, but technically it's got to affect interstate commerce. Because in order to be a federal crime...
One of the reasons it becomes federal.
It becomes federal, right. Because if it was just happened in Florida and nowhere else and had no impact on anywhere else, the feds couldn't charge it. Only Florida could charge it. But because it affected interstate commerce, which could be wire transfers, travel between states, anything like that affects interstate commerce, then it becomes federal, and that's why they can indict it. So those technical words, although you may go, why do they stick that in there? They have to stick it in there in order to get jurisdiction. And
of course, they have to say that some of it happened in the Southern District of New York as well for it to be there. Right. Boss Lady said, why only 3 charges? I would expect more based on the size and scope of the allegations. So if you notice, there's 3 charges, but just in this one paragraph, they mention 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 crimes and multiple big businesses. So while it's only 3 charges, that's kind of what happens with RICO, is you build all this criminal action into an organization and you pound them with heavier penalties, enhancements, which we're going to talk about and hear about in this case as well. And sometimes it just works better to be able to pile it all on. And using RICO, in my opinion, is an ability for the U.S. Attorney's Office to make so many more things relevant. So some things that may not be relevant to one crime, if you have RICO, all of these things that can be nefarious or code words or actions they did that might be non-criminal but make them look bad, all of that can potentially become relevant if you charge RICO versus just bribery or something like that.
Right. If you charge bribery, you're talking about one individual bribe. But if you do it in RICO, you can do a series of bribes. You can do 20 bribes. All of those are evidence you can put into a RICO case.
And you can do, not even P. Diddy bribing, but P. Diddy's security guard bribing somebody. Now that can be attributed to P. Diddy. And it's not just his own bribe, but trickles down in the entire organization. Purposes of the Combs enterprise. The purpose of the Combs enterprise included the following. So the point with this is, and again, this was a big thing with R. Kelly, is, for the family and for the mafia, it was control, it was money, it was power. Why they did all these things? Well, it's not that different when you're talking about the Combs enterprise. They're going to talk about money, fame, and power as well, but it has to be basically in furtherance of the enterprise. These criminal acts have to benefit the enterprise, basically, and this is how they benefited the enterprise. Operating a global business in the media, entertainment, and lifestyle industries, including, amongst other things, record labels, recording studios, apparel lines, alcohol, spirits business, marketing agency, and television network and media company. Protecting, preserving, promoting, and enhancing the power, reputation, and brand of Sean Combs.
That's something you don't. That's something you don't have. You don't have in mafia cases. Is a purpose of enterprise is to enhance the brand.
Yeah.
Of Sean Combs, and I think that I think that's interesting.
You kind of do. It's like you do and you don't. They would never call it the brand, but they want everybody saying that name and to have a certain thought in their head when you hear that name, the Corleone name. It's like people understand what that means. The defendant, as a musician, entrepreneur, and figure in the entertainment industry, enriching members and associates of the enterprise, including its leader, Combs, and in particular those who demonstrated loyalty to Combs and willingness to conceal his crimes. Preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power of the Combs enterprise, including the power of its leader, Combs, through violence, use of firearms, threats of violence, coercion, and verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. Fulfilling the personal desires of Combs, particularly those related to sexual gratification, including through the exploitation of women and use of commercial workers. Enabling Combs and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise to engage in unlawful acts of violence, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion, enticement to engage in prostitution, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the crimes they mentioned multiple times throughout. Securing absolute loyalty from members of the Combs enterprise, including through acts of violence and threats, and protecting the Combs enterprise and its members and associates, including Combs, from detection and prosecution by law enforcement authorities through acts of intimidation, manipulation, bribery, and threats of retaliation against individuals who witnessed the crimes committed by members and associates of the enterprise. One thing that's interesting as well, just talking about the benefits of the Combs enterprise and how this is different, like compared to R. Kelly or Young Thug, like those guys might have money, but the level of money, maybe that's why it's more like Jeffrey Epstein, like somebody noticed or mentioned in the comments, the level of money that P. Diddy has is almost unrivaled in the entertainment industry. So the lawyers, the investigators, the cooperating witnesses, I would assume, that are going to be on his side, the people that are probably going to be willing to do whatever it takes to show loyalty to him, I think is going to be different than in those other two cases.
I think what you alluded to it, the sheer numbers of individuals involved in this enterprise, much larger than the other ones you were talking about.
Exactly.
He has a lot more people working for him.
And from what we've heard, some of the victims are going to be higher profile as well.
Right.
Means and methods of enterprise. Among the means and methods, the defendant and other members of the associates conducted and participated in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise included the following. Combs and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise wielded power and prestige of Combs's role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs's orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male workers. That Combs referred to as, among other things, freak-offs. So this is a big thing a lot of people have already been talking about, is freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced performances that Combs arranged, directed, pleasured himself to, and often electronically recorded. In arranging these freak-offs, Combs, with the assistance of the members and associates of the Combs enterprise, transported and caused to be transported commercial sex workers across state lines and internationally. Again, federal nexus there, federal hook. Freak-offs occurred regularly, sometimes lasting multiple days, and often involved multiple commercial workers. During freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances in the victims in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes, unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of the victims engaging in these acts with commercial workers. After freak-offs, Combs and the victims typically received IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use.
You know what? I can't, again, it's, we'll see this more and more. The potential witnesses in this case are mind-boggling, because think how many people have been involved in all these activities that they're talking about here. I mean, it's got to be hundreds from all over the country.
Economic Matters says, interesting question from a name like that. Can the existing lawsuits and racketeering indictment bankrupt or financially ruin a wealthy person like Diddy? So
Go ahead.
I haven't read the entirety of Diddy's response, but my answer will be wait until you see the amount he suggested as his bond. What do you think it is, Dad?
Well, I saw a figure of 50
Oh,
million.
no, don't say it then if you know. Oh, you already, okay, never mind then.
You asked me.
I was gonna. Well, I wanted to wait. If you said you
Okay.
saw a figure, I was gonna have you guess, and then when we got to it,
Oh,
but
okay.
we'll talk about that later. Just to hold, because it's the biggest number I've ever seen somebody suggest as a bond amount in a situation like this. But anyways, do you think it could financially ruin him?
It could financially ruin him, not if he wins the litigation, but if he loses the racketeering, and we'll talk about that later in this indictment, it could.
So if you're talking about, are you talking about forfeiture?
Yes.
Okay. Well, outside of forfeiture, no. He's got too much money for something like this to financially ruin him. He could spend more money than anybody can dream of, really. That's sitting here talking about this. But the way it financially ruins him is forfeiture, which we're going to get to later. But like just paying these lawsuits, paying lawyers, paying bond, paying whoever he needs to pay, that's not, he has too much money for that to financially ruin him.
No problem.
Members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and other employees, facilitated the freak-offs, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel in advance with required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, and lighting, cleaning the hotel rooms.
Just tell everybody, remember the word baby oil. Go on.
Cleaning the hotel rooms after the freak-offs to try to mitigate the room damage, arranging for travel for victims, commercial workers, and Combs to and from the freak-offs, resupplying Combs with requested supplies, delivering large sums of cash to pay the sex workers, scheduling the delivery of IV fluids. So everybody that was involved in the staff and doing all this stuff, because they knew about the activity and helped plan it, they're all kind of getting sucked into the criminal organization as well, even though none of them are named in this indictment yet. In or about March of 2024, during the searches of Combs' residences in Miami, Florida, and LA, law enforcement seized various freak-off supplies, including narcotics and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. So what's always interesting to me in stuff like this when we read about freak-offs, like, sounds bad, no interest on my part, but on its own, is there a gray area of whether or not it's illegal? And my answer would be yes, there's a gray area, and it comes down to consent. It comes down to what did you pay somebody to do? What did you not pay somebody to do? Was there illegal drugs involved? Did you force illegal drugs on people? That's the question, and that's why they add those details. They don't just say a baby oil orgy that happens in hotel rooms and he damages the hotel rooms and then pays for it, because theoretically that might not be illegal. But when you introduce all of the other aspects to it, you know, forcing people, coercing people, drugging people, paying people, covering things up, abusing people physically and sexually, then that's what makes it criminal, obviously. So my guess is when we start talking about some of the defenses, that's probably going to be something that's on the defense's list of things to look into, is how many people are going to come and say, I consented to this. You know, I brought my own illegal drugs, or everybody was in on it at the same time. We all wanted to do it. You know, that's probably going to be an aspect of the defense's arguments in this case, I would think.
And we're going to see that that's a story that they're saying he creates on these freak-offs, that he tells people these are the things you should say, and that's part of the obstruction of justice.
Combs suggested victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse to cause the victims to engage in the freak-offs. Combs, did you say something else?
No.
Okay. Combs maintained control over his victims through, among other things, physical violence, promises of career opportunities, granting or threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive means, including tracking their whereabouts, dictating the victims' appearances, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying them with controlled substances. During and separate from freak-offs, Combs, among other things, hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims at times by their hair. These assaults often resulted in injuries that took days or weeks to heal. Also crimes, obviously. Combs also threatened victims' careers and livelihoods, including if they resisted participating in the freak-offs. Again, not consensual. Victims believe they could not refuse Combs' demands without risking their financial or job security, or without repercussions in the form of physical or emotional abuse. Combs also used sensitive, embarrassing, and incriminating recordings that he made during freak-offs as collateral to ensure the continued obedience and silence of the victims. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including Combs security personnel, at times carried firearms. On more than one occasion, he himself brandished firearms to intimidate or threaten others, including victims. When they searched his home, they seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, as well as a drum magazine. Members and associates enabled Combs to control other victims by following his directions regarding financial payments to victims, advancing or suppressing the victim's career opportunities, which, by the way, there's a lot of songs, there's a lot of lines in songs, lyrics in songs about this exact thing, that he can make or ruin your career. Instead, members of the associates helped conceal the violence and abuse by, among other things, assisting Combs in monitoring and preventing victims from leaving locations such as hotels and residences. These occasions included instances in which the victim was required to remain in hiding, sometimes for several days, to recover from injuries Combs inflicted without being publicly observed. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise also assisted Combs in locating and contacting victims who attempted to flee abuse. When employees witness to his abuse or others threatened Combs' authority or reputation, Combs and members and associates of the enterprise engaged in acts of violence, threats of financial and reputational harm, and verbal abuse. These acts of violence included kidnapping and arson. In addition, on multiple occasions, Combs threw both objects and people, as well as hit, dragged, choked, and shoved others. When Combs' authority or reputation was threatened by the possibility of negative publicity or legal or law enforcement action against him, including in or about late of 2023 following public allegations of Combs' crime. So this means to me that they have some evidence that even after this stuff started to trickle out, he did more.
My guess is, we haven't heard him yet, but I'll bet you there's some wiretaps and some consensual recordings where he's talking on the phone to some people.
He pressured
I'm
witnesses.
sure there's that.
Yep, because he pressured witnesses and victims, including through attempted bribery, to stay silent and not report what they experienced or knew to law enforcement. On phone calls, Combs and other members and associates, among other things, provided these victims and witnesses with a false narrative of events in an effort to conceal Combs' crimes. Combs caused these calls to be recorded on at least 2 occasions. So he even recorded some of the calls. Racketeering conspiracy. From at least on or about 2008 through on or about the date of this filing of the indictment, the defendant and others, known and unknown, being persons employed and associated with the Combs enterprise, described in paragraphs 6 through 12 of this indictment, and enterprise, engaged in activities which affected interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly combined, conspired, confederated, and agreed together with each other to violate the racketeering laws of the United States. Multiple acts involving kidnapping chargeable under the following provisions of state law. Multiple acts involving arson chargeable.
Let me stop for a second. A couple things to point out.
Okay.
One, it's a conspiracy. So that means now that all of the people involved in the conspiracy, their statements and their actions can be used against Combs, and there's an exception to the hearsay rule. They don't actually have to testify, but if somebody heard them say something, that could come into evidence. Secondly, when you look at the multiple acts, notice that the multiple acts included the California Penal Code. In racketeering, the crimes don't have to always be federal crimes. They can also be state crimes that the enterprise conspires to do. And in this case, they're also charging that he violated California law with some of these crimes. And I think that's an interesting aspect to point out in the indictment.
Multiple acts involving bribery, multiple acts indictable under this rule, which is tampering with a witness, victim, or an informant, forced labor, sex trafficking, prostitution, aiding, abetting, and willfully causing, multiple offenses involving the possession, intent to distribute narcotics and controlled substances. It was part of the conspiracy that Sean Combs, the defendant, agreed that a conspirator would commit at least 2 acts of racketeering activity in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise. And that's where that comes in, that you have to have at least 2 predicate acts. Notice of special sentencing factor. From at least in or about 2009 up to and including in or about 2018 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, as part of this agreement to conduct and participate the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise through a pattern of racketeering, the defendant agreed to, in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly recruit, entice, harbor, transport, provide, obtain, advertise, maintain, patronize, and solicit by any means a person knowing and in reckless disregard of the fact that means of force, threats, or threats of force, fraud, and coercion, as described in Title 18 USC 1591E2, and any combination of such means would be used to cause the person to engage in commercial sex act in violation of Title 18 USC 1591A1 and B1. So that's a sentence enhancement. Do you know what that enhances it to? I don't know what the potential sentence is on this.
Well, I know the potential. It's a 15-year mandatory minimum up to life.
Okay, and that's just racketeering,
right?
So we don't know what that enhancement is.
I think the minimum mandatory comes into effect with the sex trafficking.
Okay. Count 2 is sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and again, it repeats the same language it just used, that he knowingly recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, provided for the purposes of sex trafficking. Transportation to engage in prostitution is count 3. That he knowingly transferred individuals, again, same kind of thing, for commercial sex workers. And then we get to forfeiture, which is always a question people have. And I'll read through it, and then you can kind of explain the purpose of forfeiture and why it's used. As a result, the defendant shall forfeit to the United States pursuant to Title 18 any and all interest the defendant acquired or maintained in violation of those statutes, any and all interest in, securities of, claims against, property of, contractual rights of any kind affording a source of influence over the enterprise named and described herein, which the defendant established, operated, controlled, conducted, and participated in the conduct of in violation of those statutes, any and all property constituting and derived from proceeds obtained directly and indirectly, said offense, including but not limited to a sum of money in the United States currency representing the amount of proceeds traceable to the commission of said offense. As a result of committing the offense in count 2 of the indictment, he shall forfeit any and all property, real and personal, involved in, used, or intended to be used to commit or to facilitate the commission of said offenses of any and all property traceable. It's basically the same language, but the point is anything that he made or that is connected to or that he used in committing these crimes is subject to forfeiture. So why don't you explain what the purpose of that is, how hard it makes things for a defendant, and why they did it in this case?
Well, this is the reason he can be broke and can end up with nothing. Of course, if he gets convicted, he's going for a minimum 15 years anyway, and he probably will get life. But anything used, for instance, if his house was used for any of these freak-offs, the house is gone. If the corporations were used for enticements, for instance, we have a singer, and that singer's career, he says, look, your career will be enhanced or I'll kill your career if you don't do what I want you to do. Well, then the recording studio is gone. The company is gone. If he used the alcohol that his company made in order to get these people drunk, that could be gone. Everything he owns, the airplanes, the cars, if he drove somebody in his car from one location to another for, let's say, a freak off or whatever he was going to do illegally, that car is gone. All his cars, all his jets, all his houses, all his corporations, all his stock, everything is subject to forfeiture. When I read this indictment, I can't see where anything he had was not in some way connected to this illegal activity.
But there are some protections. And they say here, if any of the above described forfeiture property as a result of any act or omission of the defendant cannot be located after due diligence, has been transferred or sold to or deposited with a third person, has been placed beyond the jurisdiction of the court, has been substantially diminished in value, or has been commingled with other property which cannot be subdivided without difficulty. So it's like if he and his kid own something together and his kid has no criminal connection, then his kid can still keep the house, things like that.
Only a portion.
Right. Well, don't they usually, I mean, they're not going to kick somebody out of their home usually.
Well, it depends. If the home is not homesteaded, yes. If it doesn't have any homestead protections, they can sell the house.
I didn't say they couldn't. I didn't say they couldn't, but usually they don't do that.
Well, when you've got a multi-million-dollar, again, this is an unusual circumstance. Sometimes they don't do it because, the mother is living in a small little house that's not worth a lot of money. But when you got something worth $20 or $30 million, then you're not really throwing the kid out into the street by giving him half of the proceeds of the house. So, I I tell you, they're gonna go after every asset he's got. I really think they are.
Well, yeah, that makes it a lot harder to defend himself too.
Yeah.
So what happens to all this money that gets forfeited and property?
That goes into the general fund in order to pay for more street lights or more law enforcement or more IRS agents. It just
It
gets
can be
used by
used
the
to go to
federal
the
government.
victims too for restitution. Some
It
of
can
it.
do that. It can do that too. If they can show, in other words, if they've already settled their civil case and they come in for restitution, then there is a balancing act by the judge at that point, is how much they got in the civil case versus how much they should get of the forfeiture money. But yes, a victim can come in and try to ask for some of the forfeiture money.
Chris Pittman said, "Aren't his businesses legitimate? They seem so, but if you look at this indictment, they're basically connecting everything he did with all of his businesses to illegal activity. If he's bribing people and inviting them to Ciroc parties, they're saying now Ciroc is not a legitimate business. It's furthering the Combs enterprise. If he's using the record label to force people to come to these freak-offs that don't want to because he's either going to kill their career or promote their career, now that's a part of this criminal enterprise. So, the legitimacy of businesses is not always like, yeah, he says he sells alcohol. He actually does sell alcohol. It's how the federal government can connect it to RICO.
Right. Well, just let's take an example of a limo. Totally legitimate, bought legitimately, drives legitimately on the road, but it transports somebody from point A to point B for an illegal activity. That limo is forfeitable.
Debbie said, does anybody know when the arraignment is? I think it's this afternoon, but it's federal court, so there won't be any cameras in the courtroom. Good afternoon, gents. Is there any concern that despite the giant bond, Mr. Combs will still have the money and resources to disappear and not stand for his crimes? Thank you, Peter. So we're going to hold this until we get to the actual detention letters going back and forth to discuss that. Can there be state charges levied as well?
Yes.
But usually
There's
not.
no prohibition. There's no prohibition against it, but
yes, technically they can, but usually not in this situation.
Right.
With enhancements, how much time is he facing? Minimum mandatory of 15 years all the way up to life. Okay, so now let's go into, and I don't want to be too repetitious, so we are going to play this one on 1.5 speed just because we've heard a lot of these details, but he does answer some questions I found to be really interesting. This is the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. So we're going to listen to what he has to say, listen to him answer some questions. Then we're going to get to the detention letters, and I'm going to try to skip through some of the repetition on the detention letters as well. So let's take a listen here.
I'm gonna have to jump in real quick. Damian Williams is speaking right now.
My name is Damian Williams, and I'm the U.S. Attorney here in the Southern District of New York. Today, I'm announcing the unsealing of a 3-count indictment charging Sean Combs with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, interstate transportation for prostitution. The indictment alleges that between at least 2008 and the present, Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. As alleged in the indictment, to carry out this conduct, Sean Combs led and participated in a racketeering conspiracy that used the business empire he controlled to carry out criminal activity, including sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and the obstruction of justice. Let me say a little bit more about the charges. The indictment alleges that Combs abused and exploited women and other people for years, and in a variety of ways. As alleged, Combs used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sexual performances as male commercial sex workers, some of whom he transported or caused to be transported over state lines. Combs allegedly planned and controlled the sex performances, which he called freak-offs, and he often electronically recorded them. The freak-offs sometimes lasted days at a time, involved multiple commercial sex workers, and often involved a variety of narcotics, such as ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB, which Combs distributed to the victims to keep them obedient and compliant. As alleged, when Combs didn't get his way, he was violent. He subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse so that they would participate in the freak-offs, and that Combs hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims at times by their hair. On one occasion in March of 2016, that conduct was captured on video and later reported in the media. Specifically, Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a victim in a Los Angeles hotel when the victim was attempting to flee. Alleged, these assaults often resulted in injuries to the victims, which took days or weeks to heal. In addition to violence, the indictment alleges that Combs threatened and coerced victims to get to participate in the freak-offs. He used the embarrassing and sensitive recordings he made of the freak-offs as collateral against the victims. And the indictment alleges that he maintained control over the victims in several ways, including by giving them drugs, by giving and threatening to take away financial support or housing, by promising them career opportunities, by monitoring their whereabouts, and even by dictating their physical appearance. Because of all this, the indictment alleges that the victims did not believe they could refuse Combs without risking their security or facing more abuse. The indictment also alleged other acts of violence undertaken by Combs and others, including violence against witnesses to his abuse, kidnapping, and arson. The indictment alleges that on more than one occasion, Combs carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten victims and witnesses. Now, Combs did not do this all on his own. As I mentioned, Combs has been charged with RICO conspiracy. He used his business and employees of that business and other close associates to get his way. Those individuals allegedly included high-ranking supervisors in business, personal assistants, security staff, and household staff. The indictment alleges that those individuals facilitated the free-offs. They booked the hotel rooms and stocked them with the supplies, including drugs, baby oil, personal lubricant, extra linen, and lighting. When the hotel rooms got damaged, they helped clean it up. They arranged for victims and commercial sex workers to travel for the freak-offs, and they delivered large quantities of cash to Combs to pay for the commercial sex workers. The indictment also alleges that they helped Combs cover up his crimes. During the March 2016 incident at the LA hotel that I mentioned earlier, a member of the hotel security staff intervened, and Combs attempted to bribe the staff member with a stack of cash to make sure that what happened was kept quiet. And as the indictment alleges, in late 2023, after public allegations were made about Combs' crimes, he and others pressured witnesses and victims to stay silent, including by making phone calls to witnesses and victims and giving them a false narrative of what they had experienced. As alleged, Combs used others to help conceal his abuse by monitoring and preventing victims from leaving a location in order to hide their injuries, or by locating and contacting a victim who had attempted to flee. As part of this investigation, in March of this year, special agents from HSI executed search warrants at Combs' residences in Miami and Los Angeles. They also executed a warrant for Combs' electronic devices. During those searches, agents seized evidence of the crimes charged in this indictment. They seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 defaced AR-15s and a large capacity drum magazine. They also seized evidence of the freak-offs, electronic devices that contain images and videos of the freak-offs with multiple victims. And they seized cases and cases of the kinds of personal lubricant and baby oil that Combs' staff allegedly used to stock hotel rooms for the freak-offs, more than 1,000 bottles altogether. Here are some of the items that we recovered during the searches. And it contains, I believe, 59 rounds. I mentioned as well, we recovered 3 AR-15s. This is a close-up shot of one of the AR-15s, and you can see right here, the serial number has been thoroughly defaced. And prosecute anyone who engages in sex trafficking, no matter how powerful or wealthy or famous you may be. No one should doubt our commitment on that. A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City.
That's wild, right? That happened a year ago. The keys to, I mean, that's crazy to me.
Somebody's embarrassed.
Oh.
Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York. Second, we are not done. This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly. Anyone with information can call 1-877-4HSI-TIP. I want to express my deep appreciation for the victims and witnesses who have used their voices and helped bring this criminal conduct to light. We would not be here without them. I also want to thank the dedicated case agents on the HSI Trafficking in Persons Squad in New York. They have been with us since day one and have worked tirelessly on this investigation. They will continue to be invaluable partners to us. I also want to thank the incredible agents and analysts from SCNY who have also provided tremendous assistance on this case. I'm deeply grateful for their continued work. And finally, I want to thank the outstanding career prosecutors from SCNY who are handling this case. Meredith Foster, Emily Johnson, Chrissy Slavic, Madison Smizer, and Mitzi Steiner, and their supervisors, Jamie Backleiter and Jacqueline Kelly. They are members of the Civil Rights Unit in our criminal division. We created the Civil Rights Unit when I became U.S. Attorney. I'm deeply proud of their work on this and so many other cases. I'll now take some questions.
Eric Tursky, ABC.
Thanks, Nick. Damian, thanks. The indictment describes aggressive, open, violent, hedonistic abuse that you say was recurrent and widely known. Why did it take law enforcement so long to intervene? How many women were victimized?
I think that there are some really good questions they ask him, starting with this one. Why did it take so long? These investigations always take a long time. We saw what happened with Alec Baldwin when they fumbled the bag multiple times, and then eventually the case gets thrown out. When you have high-powered, high-dollar criminal defense attorneys, you got to make sure you do it right. You cross all your T's, you dot all your I's. I'm sure that's what it had to do with, but it still is a good question, and it's always so sad how long it takes because more people are literally being victimized every day, which goes into Kathy Hutton's question, does RICO cancel out the statute of limitations? Why don't you talk about how it deals with that and why we can reach back all the way to 2008?
RICO does not cancel the statute of limitations, but you can bring in evidence of RICO that goes all the way back to 2008. So the fact that it was still going on means that you don't have a statute of limitations problem because it was going on right
Well,
now.
It's like the last act is like
Right.
where they count the statute of limitations. So it's like 4 years or something from the last
No,
act.
actually, I think it's 10 years for RICO.
But it's different per jurisdiction. So whatever it is, it's like if it's continuing, when the last act is that you have proof of, you can go all the way back to the first act. So it's like
Right.
it doesn't cancel out the statute of limitations, but it kind of does.
By Sean Combs, and how many others were involved?
Look, our investigation is ongoing. We are committed to bringing justice to everyone who's been victimized by the defendant. I can't tell you why it took so long. I think the better focus is on the fact that we are here today. And we are committed.
So he says multiple times the investigation is ongoing. We're not done with charges or with the people involved.
To making sure that justice is done. Next question.
Thank you. Julie Ainsley, NBC.
Thank you for bringing this. You said we are not done and that Combs did not do this alone. Do you foresee that there could be other charges related to this case?
I'm not taking any off the table.
Janet Fisher, Newsday.
Yeah. What's the difference between the sex trafficking and promoting travel for the purpose of prostitution?
Well, there are different crimes with different elements. I don't think we should get into the nitty gritty of the legal discussion right now, but the sex trafficking, we believe they're all serious offenses, but the sex trafficking conduct carries some significant penalties, and we are gratified that we were able to bring that charge.
One more coercive to the
That's the one with the sentencing enhancement that we read.
I'm not going to be able to get into that, but you can look it up. And sex trafficking, especially when it involves coercion or force, is a very serious crime, and it carries significant penalties.
Good afternoon, Darla Miles, ABC 7 New York. Thank you for this press conference and for the details.
By the way, the crackling in the microphone is super annoying, but nothing I can do about it. It's just how it came through law and crime.
Questions. In context of this indictment and the information that was presented to the grand jury, are you able to clarify the number of victims? It's mentioned in the indictment, but can you specify the number of victims just for this particular indictment? And secondly, can you provide details about the arson?
Unfortunately, I'm not able to provide either. The number of victims, you are correct. We are intentional in saying multiple. The details of the arson incident are limited to what we have in the indictment and also the detention letter that we filed, which contains more details than the indictment does at various points. But we don't have anything more beyond that. Next question.
Lynn Tran,
And that's the detention letter we're going to read after this press conference.
CNN.
Are any of his accomplices or associates under investigation? And additionally, could he face any more charges?
So the investigation is ongoing. That means both as to him and to anyone else who we believe committed the crime with him. Next question.
Jill Papa.
Hi, good morning from 1010 Wins. Any indication that some of the women or victims here were imprisoned in his residences, and did he have locations where he kept them, and were not allowed to leave? And also, he's indicted here, although there were searches and raids in LA, Miami. Why in New York?
Well, I'm biased. I'm the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. I think that we have an outstanding track record of bringing some of the most impactful, sprawling, complex, difficult sex trafficking, human trafficking, labor trafficking, you name it. The Southern District of New York can do it, and so we're very proud of that. And so the scope and complexity of this investigation isn't something that we ran from. It's something that we embraced, and we will continue to do that. As to your question about whether he imprisoned anyone, all I can say is that, I mentioned this March 2016 incident where something was caught on video where a victim was attempting to flee. There was violence that was associated with it.
Was that at the residence or a hotel?
That was a hotel.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press.
Thanks a lot. Does your office intend to seek remand, or are you reaching a bail package? And if you're willing, how would you contrast this with the R. Kelly case in EDNY in terms of the elements? Thanks.
So we will be seeking detention. We have filed a letter laying out our reasoning for seeking pretrial detention. I'm not going to expand beyond what's in the letter, but it contains all of the reasoning, and it contains the law as well. There is a presumption of detention in a case like this, and we think that's warranted.
John Anise, New York Daily News.
Thank you. I was hoping to get some more detail about the searches of his residence, the guns, the cases of lubricant, and the videos. Where were they found amongst his residents? Were they all scattered around the houses in one place? I kind of wanted to just get a better picture of how that stuff would.
Well, look, I think that some of the details that you're seeking are in the detention letter. So, for instance, some of the AR-15, 2 of the 3 defaced AR-15s were found in his bedroom closet in Miami, broken down into parts along with magazines. With ammunition lit in them. So some of that detail is in the detention letter. I'm not going to be able to get into where other items were stored.
Ben Kochman, Post.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Your office was the office that had been prosecuting Epstein before he died in custody. I have not read your detention memo yet. It's the first thing I'm going to do after this ends. But does the memo address, or is your office concerned with Combs' safety in custody given what happened with Epstein?
So we are concerned with anyone's safety whenever they are detained prior to trial as part of our case.
So interesting too. It's like you got Puff Daddy, Epstein, R. Kelly, all mentioned in this press conference, which if you just go back to like 1995, it's crazy to think about what has become of that situation over the last 30 years. I mean, these are the biggest names you can think of. I mean, this is crazy.
To keep people safe as well. It's part of the criminal justice system. So, but I do not draw any sort of connection between Jeffrey Epstein's suicide and what may or may not happen to any other defendant while they are detained pre-trial. And of course, the decision whether to detain the defendant will up to a judge. Our position is that pre-trial detention is warranted under law and based on the facts of this case. And I'll leave it at that.
Are some of the prosecutors on this case some of the same prosecutors that had been handling that or that worked on the Maxwell case?
So I'm not going to get into the staffing. I will say that this team, this group of AUSAs, this incredible group has been working on this case around the clock, and they've had their hands full. Next question.
Gus Rosendale, NBC News.
Good morning, sir. Combs' attorney said that his client has been cooperative with investigators. He said that this morning. I was wondering if you would have a reaction to that.
Let me just say this. I think that generally and with increasing frequency, the word cooperative or cooperating has taken on tremendous elasticity and it no longer really bears any relation to what the word means when we use it in a very specific context. So responding to—
He means they admit to the crime and they point out other people that committed crimes. That's how he would define cooperating. Defense attorneys are like, cooperating means, sure, you have warrants. Of course, I'll let you come in my house and search. You have warrants for my cell phone. Sure, you can have my cell phone. You have warrants for my computer. Sure, you can have my computer. That's what defense attorneys call cooperating.
To lawful process and the like does not qualify as cooperation when we use that term here.
Mike Sisak, AP.
Thanks. To end, was there any discussion of Mr. Combs' surrender? I understand he was taken into custody at a hotel in Manhattan last night, and maybe that wasn't the plan. Can you elaborate on how that came about and why that was?
I'm not going to be able to get into any sort of operational details as to how he was taken into custody and when. He is in custody right now. He will be appearing in court later today.
Was there any discussion of him surrendering, given they claim he's cooperating?
I'm not going to be able to get into law enforcement tactics or operations. Well, I can't get into the charging decision. It is very meaningful to us that weapons were possessed, as we allege in the indictment. Part of the reason why this conduct was so pervasive and harmful because victims and others didn't necessarily feel comfortable denying him his wishes, as we allege, because of the presence of arms. I should leave it there.
Thanks. Last question, Jacob Shamison.
Jacob Shamsian, Business Insider. Thank you. Given that he's the sole defendant in this case and that you allege he's part of a conspiracy that involves members of his companies, do you anticipate a superseding indictment that bring allegations against other members of his companies or other co-conspirators as well?
Again, I can't take anything off the table. Anything is possible. Our investigation is very active and ongoing. And I think a lot of you who cover this office know that when we say such things, that developments are certainly foreseeable, but I predict them sitting here today. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
All right. So anything you learned from the press conference you want to comment on before we get to the detention memo?
No, I think he did a good job. He didn't comment on how they arrested him, which is important because this way he didn't have to comment on how they knew where he was, how they were able to take him into custody, why they took him into custody there. He didn't play into the hands of anybody when he did that. I think he did a good job.
All right. So let's get to their detention letter, which the purpose of this is to explain to the judge why Puff Daddy should not be given a bond or any way to get out of jail. He should be sitting in jail the whole time waiting for his trial. Usually we don't want to do this in America because people are presumed innocent. So that's why they have to put all these details together to explain to the judge why it's necessary in this case. And we're going to read through some highlights, not every word to this. or to the defense's response, just so we can get out of here at some point today. The government respectfully submits this letter in anticipation of the defendant's appearance before this court later today, which is happening right now, and in support of the government's request for the defendant's detention pending trial. The defendant therefore cannot overcome the statutory presumption in favor of detention, and the court should order him detained. Again, they go through some of the allegations in the complaint that he is a significant risk of obstructing justice. He's dangerous. He threats people. He bribes people. He coerces people. On September, they go into some background. The indictment was returned on September 17th by a federal grand jury. Racketeering conspiracy from in or about 2008 to the date of the indictment, which is literally today. And then they talk about the charges in the indictment. Then they talk about the abuse. Again, how it's force, threats of force, coercion to cause female victims to engage in certain activities. They talk about the freak-offs again, gives very detailed descriptions of the freak-offs and everything used in the freak-offs. This was, I thought, an interesting example. So they talked about, and again, it's not illegal to damage a hotel room and then pay for it, but just to give you an idea of what these parties were like, $46,000 to cover damages to a penthouse hotel in Manhattan in 2012. Like, that's wild. It wasn't just the freak-offs. There were other violent acts. He was a co-conspirator to kidnapping, individual at gunpoint, facilitating breaking into and entering a residence of another person. Multiple witnesses will testify at trial to the events surrounding the kidnapping and break-in, the latter of which is corroborated by police reports and other records. 2 weeks later, the defendant's co-conspirators set fire to individual one's vehicle by slicing open the car convertible top and dropping a Molotov cocktail inside the interior. Police and the fire department reports extensively document the arson and conclude that the fire was intentionally set. Multiple witnesses would also testify the defendant bragging about his role in destroying the individual's car. It's wild that that more wasn't made of this in the past, right? It's like they're connecting all of these wild events, and it's like, seems like this is something that could have been pounced on earlier. You highlighted all these just to highlight all the different civil suits.
All the different civil suits, right, brought against him, right.
Law enforcement reports corroborate that police responded to several instances of the defendant's violence, including assaults against victims and other individuals. More recently, there have been an outpouring of other public allegations, and that's talking about the civil suits. At no point during the past few decades has the threat of public exposure or law enforcement intervention deterred the defendant from continuing his abuse. So what they're saying is all these allegations, all this abuse, robbery, gunpoint, Molotov cocktails, abusing victims, hurting women. And there's been police reports, there's been civil lawsuits, there's been public outrage, there's been all these things that you would think would deter somebody from continuing this criminal activity. That didn't work for Diddy. So just having him arrested here and indicted here, they're saying, is not going to stop him from continuing violent acts. Therefore, the only way to stop him from continuing committing crimes is to have him sit in jail until trial.
Yeah, and I may say this multiple times. Remember, this is a persuasive letter for a judge. So they're trying to tell the judge, we're going to create an atmosphere for you so that you really understand what's going on. And one of the things we're creating for you is you can't stop this guy. There is just nothing that stops this guy. Think about it. Who wouldn't curtail their activity after all this publicity? What idiot wouldn't, unless it was an idiot who had no regard for the law, no regard for decency, and had no respect for women? That's all that really is what's being created here in the mind of that judge when they're writing this.
And a couple other things. Number one, this is a common argument the state likes to make, or the prosecutors like to make, that someone believes they're above the law. And I think that's a pretty good argument they can make about P. Diddy. Number two, I just lost my train of thought for number two. It'll come to me later. All right, they talk about the firearms again. He pointed these out.
Now, your people probably couldn't see, but if you look at that gun,
yeah, filed off.
See how they've drilled out the serial number.
There's really only one reason to do that.
Right, and that there is only one reason to do that.
I can't think of a non-criminal reason to do that.
And he had two of those in his room. He had two of those in his room.
But he also had legally purchased guns locked in the safe. So it's like, why do you have some legally purchased with the serial numbers and then others where you shave the serial numbers off? It's like, Doesn't take a rocket scientist to put a lot of this together. Talk about a large capacity drum. Certain of the firearms during the March 2024 searches were licensed to a current member of Cohn's security staff. In addition to that individual, during the course of the charged conspiracy, Combs has employed other security staff members with significant criminal history, including violent crimes and firearms offenses. Bribed witnesses and obstruction of justice. And this is big in a detention. Oh, this is what I was going to say. So the other thing that's important about the detention letter, this was my number 2 before, is you're going to see in here a lot of things in here and arguments, and the U.S. Attorney's Office saying things as fact may not come in at trial, may not be corroborated, may end up being wrong, or having a witness say, no, that was actually my firearm that I left at his house. But for now, it's taken in a light that the judge is going to look at it and determine if this is enough to hold somebody over and to not allow them to be out during trial. So it's a different kind of burden and set of rules than we would have at trial, right, and rules of evidence used there.
Right. The rules of evidence at these hearings are totally different.
So just because we read it here doesn't mean we're going to see it again at trial.
Right.
For example, in 2016, the defendant was captured on video surveillance striking, kicking, dragging a woman when a member of the hotel security staff, okay, we already read that. Within days of the incident, the surveillance video disappeared from the hotel.
Let me stop for a second. The one thing that has not been brought up, and the other things we've looked at, is that the security guard refused the bribe. After the security guard refused the bribe. So that guard, yes, they tried to bribe him. He refused the bribe. And now you're going to read that last sentence.
And then after the bribe was refused, the surveillance video disappeared from the hotel's server.
Right. So somebody else took a bribe.
The defendant and other members of the enterprise made repeated phone calls to victims and witnesses, during which they provided the victims and witnesses false narratives of the events. And he recorded some of them. Government's investigation is ongoing. Okay, we've already kind of mentioned that there could be more charges for P. Diddy. There could be more co-defendants.
Right. And they're also saying to the judge, and it's one of these red herrings they can put out there, we can't fully tell you all the details. That's what it says in that paragraph.
It's
so
like
judge,
wink,
there's
wink,
other things we're not telling you.
Right. There's even more. They talk about how he's a danger. So they talk about the Bail Reform Act of why you would not allow somebody bond if they're a danger to the community, if they're a flight risk. A finding of risk of flight must be supported by the preponderance of the evidence. A finding of dangerousness must be supported by clear and convincing evidence. Obstruction of justice is another ground for pretrial detention. Clear and convincing evidence that there exists a serious risk the defendant would threaten, injure, intimidate a prospective witness or juror. And again, they've already mentioned he tries to bribe people. He tried to call witnesses and victims. He tried to bribe security guards. He'll make surveillance video disappear. They're already accusing him of all this in this letter before bringing up what the actual standard is. The judge must consider in the analysis the nature and circumstances of the crimes charged, including whether the offense is a violation of Section 1591, the weight of the evidence against the person, the history and characteristics of the defendant, including the person's character, past conduct, and financial resources, and the nature and seriousness of the danger any person or the community would be posed by the person's release. The concept of dangerousness encompasses not only the effect of the defendant's release on the safety of inevitable individuals, such as victims and witnesses, but also the danger that the defendant might engage in criminal activity to the detriment of the community, which they've already said nothing deters this guy. You can sue him, you can take his money, you can accuse him of crimes publicly, you can even have police reports, arrests, criminal accusation. It's still not going to stop it. Evidentiary rules don't apply to the detention hearings, which we already mentioned. Whether a judicial officer concludes a hearing that no condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the appearance of a person as required and the safety of any other person and the community, such judicial officer shall order the detention of a person before trial. Additionally, whereas here a defendant is charged with sex trafficking, in other words, or in violation of this.
He's basically what that's saying is normally you're entitled to the presumption of bond.
Right.
So that you're presumed to be able to have a bond. In sex trafficking cases, the Congress has passed a law saying that presumption does not exist. What the presumption is in a sex trafficking case is you're not entitled to a bond, and the defense then has to overcome the presumption. So the burden is now on the defense to show he's entitled to a bond. That's the difference between the type of crime we're dealing with.
And then they get to the dangerousness, as if we haven't heard enough about it already. They talk about how it's systemic and pervasive, how he abused women. At least 5 women have publicly accused the defendant of violent sexual assaults dating back to the 1990s. So this question just came in as well. Is it likely they have more than what is in the indictment and detention letter? I'll give my answer, then you give yours. So from my perspective, they're saying things like the civil lawsuits, 5 women publicly. I can almost guarantee there's more. From my perspective, that's my guess. But also I think that maybe some of it they won't be able to corroborate, so they don't want to say it yet if they're not going to bring it. If they have enough, you don't want to bring weak evidence if you have strong evidence. But I would think they have more than what we've read. What do you think?
Well, as a strategy, you don't give out all your evidence to the defense right here in this letter. As a strategy, you hold back some good stuff so that you can spring it on them later. Remember, this is a federal case. In federal court, you don't have depositions. You don't have a lot of things that you have in state court as far as discovery goes. So prosecutors are allowed to hold a lot of things close to their vest in a federal case. No prosecutor is going to lay out his entire case in a letter like this. So I guarantee you there's a lot left.
Obstruction. There have been civil lawsuits filed against him. And he said certain things publicly, like, let me be absolutely clear. I did not do any of the awful things being alleged. Through counsel, the defendant vehemently denied these offensive and outrageous allegations described in the complaint as riddled with baseless and outrageous lies. It was not until the video surveillance footage of the defendant's attack was leaked to the media months later that the defendant was forced to admit he had, in fact, perpetrated in the disgusting attack. Clearly, the defendant is willing to deflect, minimize, and lie, and induce others to do so on his behalf to avoid taking responsibility for his own actions. If you guys remember back, when all this was happening, the Cassie lawsuit, the denial from Diddy, then the video comes out, the apology from Diddy, we said this would absolutely be used against him in court one day, and today is that day. So from my perspective, no surprise there that they're going to use his comments against him. More recently, the defendant has directly through intermediaries engaged in obstructive conduct related to the matters under investigation in this case. And again, they're talking about reaching out to witnesses and victims and recording those phone calls. Made multiple calls to another victim, recorded certain of those calls. During the calls, he repeatedly asked for the victim's support and friendship and attempted to convince the victim that she had willingly engaged in acts constituting the sexual abuse. The defendant also assured the victim that if she needed the defendant to, she ain't got to worry about nothing else. A thinly veiled attempt to coerce the victim into adopting and supporting the defendant's false version of the events to protect the defendant. Even more concerning, since learning about the criminal investigation, including following the execution of the search warrants at his residences, Combs contacted other witnesses on multiple occasions, including other witnesses who had received grand jury subpoenas. So he literally thinks he's just above it. He's going to call people. He's going to offer them money. He's going to tell them it was consensual. He's going to tell them how he needs them to testify and just think that he's going to fix everything with money. That's what it seems
How
like.
can any reasonable person think they're so bulletproof that after the search warrant, he still makes these calls, and he makes calls to people that are under grand jury subpoenas and they're going to appear before a grand jury? I mean, that's just crazy. The guy has no sense of reality.
They have warrants to search your house, to search your phone, to search your computers. His lawyers are telling him, well, that's also enough for them to wiretap your phones. And all of your acquaintances probably are people that they think are involved in the conspiracy. They can tap their phones too. I mean, that's not smart. Risk of flight. Nor can the defendant overcome the presumption of flight risk. Here, the defendant is facing at least 15 years imprisonment if convicted. This fact alone would provide a compelling incentive for anyone to flee from prosecution, but the incentive to flee is especially strong for this defendant, who at age 54 faces the real prospect of spending a substantial portion of the rest of his life in prison. Moreover, their accounts are well corroborated by significant extrinsic evidence, including financial and billing records, travel records, electronic data, and communications, including extensive communications by and with the defendant himself. For example, the victim's testimony regarding freak-offs is at times corroborated by other witness testimony, communications with the defendant and commercial sex workers, travel records, hotel records, videos of the freak-offs, and records reflecting or indicating payment. Similarly, a victim's physical abuse may be corroborated by, among other things, videos of the abuse, photographs of the injuries, reports made to law enforcement, communications with the defendant and others, and testimony from other witnesses who saw or heard about the abuse. the vast and varied sources of evidence described in detail below will be compelling evidence of guilt at any trial in this case. So basically they're saying the chances of conviction are high, and because they are high and he's likely going to spend 15 years in prison at least, that is a reason that he is a flight risk. And his net worth is publicly estimated at being close to $1 billion. Through conversations with defense counsel, the government understands that the defense counsel is currently in possession of the defendant's passport, as well as the passports of several of the defendant's family members, and that the defendant is in possession of attempting to sell his plane and Los Angeles residence. As explained above, however, the defendant's vast resources make him a flight risk without a passport, private plane, or multiple residences. So the reason he's selling his plane and his LA residence and giving them his passport is to try to prove to them that he is not a flight risk and he's not going anywhere. Right?
Yes. And you'll see later on, it's a terrible thing. Here his lawyer is trying to do what he can to create a scenario where his client should get a bond and he should be able to stay out. And what the government does, which, anybody would do, good lawyers do, flip it around and use it against the guy. So as you read, you'll find out how they're flipping the defense lawyer's conversations and statements against him.
It also talks about here how he traveled internationally several times per year, has $1 million cash on him at any time, dozens of bank accounts, lots of money they probably can't get to. As discussed,
go ahead. You're going to read what I was going to say. Go ahead.
The defendant's legal team has attempted to mitigate this substantial risk of flight by taking steps such as taking his family's passports, attempting to sell plane. We already talked about that. Is there anything else you want to mention about that?
Well, I said they have taken the steps precisely with the goal of crafting an argument to bail before the court. So that's the exact reason. So they're turning it around on the defense lawyer saying, you're not doing this because your client's a good bail risk. You're doing this because you're trying to create a scenario that's not true.
Mercy says 15 years. I don't know what ARS means. Is that on the low end? That's the minimum.
Right.
My guess is if he was convicted, he'd get more.
My guess is life.
Weight of the evidence. As to witnesses, to date, the government has concluded interviews with over 50 victims and witnesses. Now, we don't know how many of those are victims because it's combined them to victims and witnesses, but my guess is there's way more than 5 victims because we know the 5 victims that publicly have come out. The government only expects that number to continue to grow given that the investigation, which is now public, is ongoing. Yeah.
So go ahead.
Now that charges are out there and are public and have been filed, a lot more likely more people come out of the woodwork because they feel empowered and they have somebody on their side and they're not alone.
Well, what's going to happen is not only victims, but what's going to happen are the co-conspirators. They've only indicted him, and they did that for a reason. This way they can go to everybody and say, okay, when they amend an indictment and add people, it's called a superseding indictment. So they can go and say, look, we're planning on doing a superseding indictment where we're going to add the other people that were involved in this criminal activity. You can be part of that superseding indictment. Your name can be on there, or you can cooperate. And if you cooperate, we'll make a deal with you. So make a deal with us. You're not in the superseding indictment, and you get 5 years, 4 years, whatever the deal can be. But they deliberately only indicted one person, so that leaves everybody else fair game for making a deal. And there's another quote that people use is, first in, first out, which means the first into the courthouse is the first one's going to get out of prison. So there's guys running to that courthouse right now trying to make a deal with their lawyers so that they don't have to serve 15 years as a mandatory minimum. I guarantee you there's a line out the door.
Well, one of the other comments said, I wonder how far Diddy's reach goes into law enforcement or the U.S. Attorney's Office or judges or things like that. And I don't know. I do think that this will be different than your average case in that people might not flip as quickly just because of the power and money and influence that Diddy does have. First, hey from Sweden. Sorry if you answered this already, but do you think he has been followed for a while, or is this all just based on the raid in March? No, definitely followed before that. They had to get enough information to even have enough for probable cause to get a warrant to get those searches. What were you going to say?
No, you're right. Now, I was going to say that. Go ahead.
Reese's mom says, will they be able to force people like Usher and Bieber to testify or give depositions? I mean, you probably don't want to bring people that don't want to be there. especially if you have enough victims and witnesses that do want to be there. Forcing people that might muddy up your case is not something usually U.S. attorneys want to do. What do you think?
Well, look what happened. Look what's happening in the the Thug trial. You look what's happening in the Thug trial, in that, those prosecutors did not do a good job of putting together the witnesses that were going to nail these people. So that's what they're going to do. They're not going to just randomly subpoena people. They're going to go after people that can help them and that are willing to help them and willing to cooperate. These are experienced federal prosecutors. These are not Miss Love from the Fannie's Willis's office down in Georgia. These guys are sharp. These guys know what they're doing. The reason they took so long is, I guarantee you, they've got a lot of stuff already lined up. This is a solid case. They could try it tomorrow. I don't have any criticism of these prosecutors. They know what they're doing, and they're going to get the right people as witnesses.
What'd you say?
They're going to get the right people as witnesses.
So from my perspective, yeah, they talk about a lot of the evidence that they already have, 90 cell phones, laptops, etc. They talk about the firearms. They talk about the free golfs. They talk about the baby oil again. But I thought it was interesting that they have over 300 grand jury subpoenas and other voluntary productions. These materials come from over 100 entities and individuals, including communications providers, tech companies, social media companies, banks and other financial institutions, airlines, hotels, car services, and other travel-related companies, escort services, and even the defendant's companies and wealth management firm. Well, you better believe, like, some of his professional people that work with him are like, yeah, take it all. We had no idea. We didn't know what was going on. But, like, that's a lot. That's a lot on any case. I don't care what case it is. That's a lot. And I bet you they didn't do this in the Young Thug RICO trial. They didn't do this much work beforehand. You can almost guarantee that.
Heck no.
By the way, for the people that are interested in that YSL trial, we are doing a breakdown tonight to update you on what's happened over like the last week since we've done our last video. So make sure you subscribe and like this video, and come back tonight. My dad and I are going to kind of give an update of what's been going on there as well. The defendant's proposed bail package is insufficient. Defense counsel has proposed certain bail conditions, including home detention with the electronic monitoring and a $50 million bond secured by the defendant's Miami property. It's like, who cares? So big deal. You give us one property. That's not hamstringing you that much. These conditions are plainly insufficient to address the legitimate concerns set out above, in particular, given the defendant's history of engaging in obstructive conduct. The court must reject the insufficient conditions proposed by defense counsel, which do nothing to prevent and detect such conduct. As a conclusion, as set forth above, the defendant poses an ongoing and significant danger to the community, has repeatedly engaged in obstructive conduct, and presents serious risk of flight. Government respectfully submits that the defendant cannot meet his burden of overcoming the statutory presumption in favor of detention. There are no conditions of bail that would assure the appearance of the defendant or safety of others. Accordingly, an application for bail should be denied. Mercy said, how much did Cassie coming forward, I think it's forward, accelerate the case? My guess was they knew this was going on and she was already cooperating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. That would be my guess. What do you think?
Well, I think that her case and the other 3 cases that were filed, I don't know if they spurned it on because she did settle the case. Remember, she did settle the case. So I don't know if it spurned it on or not, but, it drew attention to it. And that kind of attention is what causes the FBI to start investigating a case. I think this guy's been on the radar for a long time.
I agree.
If you remember, he went to trial once before on a case and he beat it. I think it was a drug case. Was that what it was? I forget.
I can't remember, but yeah, he has been charged before for sure.
Yeah, he's had charges before. He beat it. This guy's been on the radar for a while. So it's no surprise that they saw something else in this guy and they went after it.
All right. I'm getting sick of reading. Last one.
And this one I haven't seen.
Yeah, Mr. Combs, through his counsel, asked for release on certain conditions. Yesterday evening, he was arrested. This letter is going to walk through a series of actions taken by Mr. Combs over the past 6 months that prove he's not a risk of flight or danger to anyone in the community. By the way, if we knew that he was going to get indicted at some point based on the raids and everything that was happening, you better believe his lawyers knew, right? So this is not a surprise to them. They knew this was coming. And over the last 6 months, they've been doing things in preparation, because when we represent somebody pre-indictment, as we call it as criminal defense lawyers, we're working a lot pre-indictment. And some of the things we do are exactly what you're going to read in this letter and what we're going to hear in this letter, which is give up the passport, give up the plane, give up some of the other residences. Don't go anywhere. If you do go somewhere, make sure you come back on your own volition, cooperate, turn yourself in when the time comes, because all that's going to be able to help you if and when you are indicted. And that's exactly
I haven't read this letter, but I think it was no accident that he was in New York when he got arrested, since he was indicted in New York, so he wouldn't have to be arrested in Miami and then transported up to New York in chains. This was all coordinated somehow. And they also constantly were in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm sure they were talking with the assistant U.S. attorneys almost daily to find out what's going on.
So they say he did something extraordinary. He left his home in Miami and traveled to New York, the very location of the prosecutors and agents investigating him. Through counsel, he promptly told the government that he had voluntarily come to New York, offered to tell them specifically where he was, offered to turn himself in at the appropriate time. Even though Mr. Combs came to New York, authorized his lawyers to tell the government the location, and offered to self-surrender, the government effected an arrest last evening. This we know is the government's right. However, that he traveled to New York to self-surrender is also something the court should consider. So that's a little shot taken at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Maybe they're trying to do some of this for the cameras.
Well, they did it for the cameras. They did the arrest for the cameras because, again, he was going to voluntarily turn himself in. He went to New York. But, and I got to tell you, it's not uncommon in a high-profile case that they ignore the lawyer's offer to turn the client in and go ahead and arrest the client so they can do what we call a perp walk, so they can do a walk with the client in chains. So, again, not an unusual event. U.S. attorneys and FBI do this all the time.
Rebecca said, do you think that this will actually make it to court? How dumb would that be?
Oh, I really think there's very little doubt this is going to trial.
Yeah, I don't think he can admit to. There's nothing in here he can admit to.
No.
Everything's over for your family, for you, your legacy. At least if you go to trial and lose, you can say the jury got it wrong. I'm still innocent. With somebody like him, I mean, I feel like it'd be tough for him to plead to this.
Well, and not just to plead, but he'd have to plead open. There's just no way the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to give him a deal, going to give him a break.
And I don't think the judge is going to take it easy on him either.
Right. So he would have to take a deal that's no deal. Actually, he'd have to plead open, which means he'd have at least 15 years in prison. So he's got nothing to lose by going to trial.
The defense proposes the following bail package. So here's what they say they think is appropriate to make him show up to protect the community, because and the point of this is, if you were to leave or if you were to commit another crime while you're out on bail, it would hurt you. It would decimate you, basically, is what they're trying to prove, that if he were to put all this up, there's no way he's going to leave. And remember, this guy worth $1 billion, $50 million bond, co-signed by him, his mother, his sister, his mother, the mother of his oldest daughter, and his 3 adult sons. Secured by the equity in his residence in Miami, which is appraised at $48 million. Mr. Combs paid off the remaining mortgage of $18 million so the home can be used to secure bond and free of mortgage, which, again, things you do to set up and get ready for a moment like this. Drop $18 million to pay off your house. Secured by the equity of Mr. Combs' mother's home in Miami. Mr. Combs' travel will be restricted to the Southern District of Florida and the Southern District of New York. To attend medical appointments, which he will address to the court in a separate sealed submission. So he's got some medical issues going on, as well as the Eastern District of New York or the District of New Jersey, only to the extent that his travel to and from New York involves an airport in those districts. Mr. Combs' passport was surrendered to his counsel on April 1st, which, again, is how you know they all knew this was coming. His counsel advised prosecutors of this fact in email dated the same day. The passports of the following family members who have already surrendered their passport counsel after the raids. This is interesting. So these people have all surrendered their passports. Are they unindicted co-conspirators? Are they witnesses for the prosecution? Janice Combs, Chance Combs, Jesse Combs, Delilah Combs, and Love Combs. Since at least April of 2024, Mr. Combs has been making efforts to sell his airplane. We informed the government of these efforts in May. It's probably hard to sell an airplane. I wouldn't know. As explained further below, just this weekend, Mr. Combs entered into a letter of intent with a party to sell it. Mr. Combs understands he is not to travel to Los Angeles, where the plane had been located this week, and further, that the plane is not to be brought to any district in which he is located until it is sold. Home detention with GPS monitoring and all other standard conditions of pretrial supervision. So what do you think of that package presented by the defense?
Well, the sad thing, to me, it's insufficient. None of this stuff would prevent him from leaving the country and go set up somewhere from a country where you can't be extradited. There are countries like that. So the package does not impress me.
And honestly, $50 million, well, that's a lot of money for basically anyone. It really does not affect his ability to do whatever he wants, depending on what's forfeited.
The sad thing is, and I've always thought this, and I always felt sorry for my clients with a lot of money, was the more successful you are, and the fact that you're successful and you travel a lot, the government brings your success up as a negative so that you have to post a higher bond because you're more of a flight risk because you've been successful in your life.
But that's just true, though.
It's just sad. Your success is a negative when it comes to bonds.
But it's not hurting success. It's hurting your ability to flee. And rich people have a greater ability to flee than people that have no money. That's just a fact.
Well, of course that's true.
Right. So then I think that's the point of it. What does pleading open mean? It basically means you don't have an agreement with the other side onto what the penalty is going to be, but you're pleading open to the court so the judge sentences you as they see fit.
Right. No deals.
I see a lot of Adelson questions. I'm going to get to them at the very end. Okay, then they talk about the history of cooperation, how he gave his passport, and they maintained it since April. The lawyers agreed to advise the government of all domestic travel. And so here's I have a question for you here because I know how we do this. They also counsel advised the government of Mr. Combs' efforts to sell his plane. Mr. Combs voluntarily relocated to New York in advance of his arrest. They're just kind of repeating things. Counsel advised the government it was in the possession of the passports. Counsel's assistance to the government in concealing the subpoenas. So they knew people that were going to be subpoenaed, but they didn't tell anybody, except that it seems like Puff Daddy was still talking to some of these witnesses, unfortunately. What I wanted to ask you, though, is paying off the mortgage. Okay, so yeah, that was all kind of the repetition. So when you agree to do this as a lawyer, because we would do all the same things, we'll tell you if he's going to go anywhere. We'll tell you where he is. We'll make sure he ends up in this jurisdiction. Here's his passport. He's selling his plane. The lawyer's saying all this stuff to try to help this process. But in reality, usually that's happening because you know they have something and you know an indictment is coming soon.
Right.
Usually that's when you are the most cooperative.
Sure. You're ready and you're trying to make them think you're a nice guy. That you're a good guy. Don't worry about me. I'm a good guy. But
so
again, this doesn't impress me. If I was a judge, I wouldn't be swayed by
hold on. We'll get what you would do at the end. Hold your thought on what you would do as far as the bond. Because Mr. Combs is presumed to be innocent, Supreme Court has observed the liberty is the norm. Detention prior to trial is the exception. We talked about this already. Talk about different factors. All right, let's get into their analysis here. The nature and circumstances of the offenses. Mr. Combs is charged with a 3-count indictment. First count, racketeering. As alleged. Okay, then we have sex trafficking. Trying to get to where they actually discuss whether or not they think alleges forfeiture. So they say his history and characteristics are best demonstrated by the way he has responded to this investigation from the very inception to his most recent decision to travel to New York when his lawyers told him that the case could be soon starting. It's like they're going a little overboard, repeating this so many times, acting like he's a saint for doing this, when in reality, if they didn't think the feds had anything, there's no way they would cooperate. There's no way they would have turned over this or been telling them that or had him shown up here. There's just no way. But they're acting like, oh, he's been such a good guy, even though, he knows he's innocent and didn't do anything wrong. which again is not to be held against him as if that means he did it, but they're acting like he did this out of the kindness of his own heart, when in reality, they had warrants for all this stuff anyways. And if he would have tried to flee, just like the Adelsons, they could have showed up at the airport and arrested him with his bag of cash, which then now they have consciousness of guilt and they start this process sooner. Right? I mean, that is part of the analysis here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a no-win for I mean, there's no way that P. Diddy can win on this, I guess, offer that he's putting forth.
Aside from his actions since the inception of the investigation, Mr. Combs' character is shown through his demonstrated contributions to society in several important areas. First, he has given generously over his entire life to charitable causes. To name a few, since founding Bad Boy, Mr. Combs actively supported and donated millions to after-school programs, organizations like Boys and Girls Clubs of America. His commitment stems from positive influence such programs had on his own childhood, inspiring him to give back to similar initiatives. He also supported organizations, including the National Foundation of Teaching Entrepreneurship, further emphasizing his dedication to creating opportunities for younger entrepreneurs. Again, not unusual for us to put stuff like this in here.
Yeah, and he's going to have, he's bound to have a bunch of people at his bond hearing that are famous and, well-known people in the community, and
I'm
to show what a great guy he is.
If some of the usual suspects show up, we'll see.
Right.
They talk about his philanthropy, health and disaster relief efforts, advancing Black people in the music, entertainment, and fashion industries. While he's always been controversial, he has always championed minorities and underrepresented communities. As chairman of Combs Global, Mr. Combs has used his platform to create the Excellence Program and internship initiative with Endeavor in July of 2021. Major initiative designed to provide an development opportunities for aspiring executives in entertainment, marketing, music, and fashion from the underrepresented community. So what the interesting part of this is, that could backfire. Those types of comments, if you read the indictment and the indictment's true, this is exactly the type of stuff he would use to force people into freak offs, to further, Combs' enterprises and what they wanted, and to get him richer, more powerful, and more famous. That's exactly what they're accusing him of doing, and they're trying to still put the positive spin on it. So we'll see what the witness.
There's two sides. There's two sides of the story. The side the prosecution is how they're going to interpret his enterprises and boys and girls clubs and all the stuff he does to advance minorities and to advance minorities in the music world. And yet the minorities he's advancing are these young girls who he's advancing in the music world. So, the government is going to use it against him during trial, and the defense is using it to try to get him a bond.
And then they talk about how the proposed bail package addresses any issues with flight and danger to the community. He's never evaded, avoided, eluded, or run from a challenge in his life. I don't think he's ever faced one quite as big as this. He will not start now, as he has handled every hardship. He will meet this case head on. He will work hard to defend himself, and he will prevail. Recognizing that a bail hearing is not the time to defend the merits of the criminal case, it is relevant to the bail that the defendant has made clear commitment to defend an eminently defensible case. This is such a case. All right. So that's the defense's defense or response. Let's read some questions, and then we'll end with what you think the judge is going to do.
Can I put in there what I think that they should have done?
The defense should have done?
Yeah. I think
let's answer two questions first.
Okay.
Best guess on how long to get this to trial?
Oh, at least a year.
Probably more.
Yeah.
John, bond is $50 million liquid and an additional approximately $100 million in assets, restricting your family's travels. The legal system must have something super concrete, right? What are your thoughts? So this will kind of be, I guess we'll make this the prelude into what should the defense have done, and then what are your thoughts on what the judge will do?
Yeah. And I've done this on other cases with high profile, big money people. Not nobody with this much money, but big money people. All right. Number one, I would have offered to have him at a house and with 24-hour security, ex-FBI agents or ex-US Marshals or ex-federal law enforcement that is actually sitting with him 24 hours a day, with him having an ankle bracelet, so that they're there watching him. He cannot leave. He is stuck in the house with that security, paid for obviously by him, so that we have a situation where he can't leave, and it would be reported by a retired federal law enforcement agency if he would try to leave. I would do that. So he'd basically be under guard. Secondly, I would take all his assets, put them into a trust managed by the United States government that would allow him for a salary, things that whatever his expenses are, so that he could live in the house, have his expenses, but all of his assets would be in trust managed by the U.S. government and have a trustee in charge of that. Yes.
Hold on a second. With doing that, he can also pay everybody on the payroll, legitimate businesses, pay for all of his properties, still give his kids money if he does that. They'll let him do all of the legal things, even though it's under the control of the government.
Right, because the trustee has to approve every one of those payments.
But it doesn't mean everything he gives to everybody goes away.
I don't understand that question.
It doesn't mean that, like, if he's paying for his kid's house, it doesn't mean that that's going away necessarily. That could be seen as a legitimate expense that's approved by the trustee. That's all I was saying.
Yes, that's correct. So the trustee would approve all expenses, and he would have a 24/7 guard at his house watching him and everything that he did, and an ankle bracelet. So I would have offered those things because this is the kind of case you've got to get extreme. It's a case where this guy's not getting out unless you give something extreme, and I would do that. That's what I would have offered, because I think that is about as good as you can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would have been a better offer than this. Maybe P. Diddy would not have been interested in that. I don't think the judge is going to go for the defense's proposal, but I'm not so sure the judge is going to say no bail. What do you think the judge is going to say?
No bail.
That's what you think?
Yep.
If I had to bet, I would bet the judge would say no bail, because the judge won't usually do what you just said. The judge won't usually come up with something like that. If it's proposed by the defense counsel, then it's more likely to get approved. But I think the judge goes somewhere between double or triple what the defense has proposed, because the defense never proposes their max amount. But double or triple what the defense has proposed, or no bail. If I was a betting man, I would put it on no bail too. But I'm not so sure about it.
I would detain him. I would absolutely detain him.
Excuse me.
I don't think the defense has carried their burden, because the presumption is for detention.
You seem more sure about it. That's what I was going to say. Is that right?
Yes, I do feel like he's going to be detained.
Gosh, my eyes are watering now. I just got something caught in my throat. Okay. You can leave now, Dad, if you want. There's a couple off-topic questions that I'm going to hit. Except Rebecca said, ask me how I'm doing in my fantasy football league. Ha ha, Rebecca. Okay, I lost this week. She's brought it up like 50 times. I lost this week in our fantasy football league. Not to her. We haven't had our matchup yet, so we'll see. We'll see how that one goes. But thank you so much for joining us, Dad. And you guys can catch us tonight on the YSL update. My dad's going to come on, break it all down on a video that we have for you. So thank you, Dad.
Can I X out of mine?
Yeah, I think so. All right. Yeah. If I need you to come on for it to upload, I'll let you know.
Okay.
All right. Peace out. Okay. I know we try to stay on topic, but I hope you can cover the Donna Adelson situation. Thanks, Peter and Mr. Tragos. Denise said, hi, Peter and Papa Tragos. Are you aware Daniel Rashbaum had to withdraw from Donna Adelson's lawyer? Donna was clearly distraught and in tears in the courtroom. And then quick thoughts on Donna Adelson before you end today's stream, maybe. So there were lots more questions about Donna Adelson. I couldn't believe what I saw. I cannot believe that this is something that just came up now. I do not think it was a defense tactic to delay. Donna Adelson was crying. She wanted it. She wanted Rashbaum on. I think that was her absolute best chance. I think this is horrible for Donna Adelson. And all of the steps that happened were very curious, and I have a lot of thoughts on them. So I'm going to do a video tomorrow. I'm probably going to do it tomorrow morning or earlier than our normal video. Maybe we'll see what my schedule allows. But I definitely want to do a full video on this and pull the clips from exactly what happened today. That trial is continuing. It is not starting today like it was supposed to. So we're going to have to take a whole video and talk about that and answer all your questions. Ashley, off topic, can you please cover Karen Reed's appeal? I will try, Ashley, but it's definitely on my back burner to do appeals. First off, just generally speaking. Number two, it's kind of repetitive to some of the motions to dismiss that we've already talked about, and so many other things are happening. But I was planning on doing Donna Adelson's trial for the next couple of weeks, and now that that's gone away, maybe it's open time for the Karen Reed appeal. You guys let me know what the content is you want to hear about. Put it in the comments. Please hit the like button in this video. It was a marathon. It was a long one for me. I like for them to be an hour. This one was almost 2 hours. But come back tonight. Hit the subscribe button. You guys are the best. Until next time, yes, like this video, please. But I am out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.